All right, so we're back at the Civil Rights Movement, and today we're going to start with focusing on how African Americans were really focusing on trying to integrate schools, trying to strike down that Plessy versus Ferguson law, and they were making a lot of headway. One of the guys that's really going to start to make a lot of headway is going to be our man Thurgood Marshall. Now, Thurgood Marshall, very much like W.E.B. Du Bois, was denied the right to attend the University of Maryland Law School, which is predominantly all white. He'll get turned away just like Du Bois did with Harvard. So we know that Du Bois eventually got to go back to Harvard, but he's never going to be treated right while he's at Harvard. And Thurgood Marshall realizes that it's just not a fight that he wants to fight. So he'll take his talents and go to Howard University, which is predominantly an all African American school. He'll be trained by a couple guys. One of them is going to be Charles Hamilton Houston. He was really gearing these guys to battle these unconstitutional rulings such as Plessy versus Ferguson. And he will join the NAACP legal team fight for African Americans in a court case you probably remember from civics and economics known as Brown versus the Board of Education. He will eventually go on to become a member of the Supreme Court, and he was served there from 65 until 91. So a couple questions that we went over that we should go over to kind of review things and so on and so forth. First one, why did Emmett Till's mother have an open casket? We talked about yesterday how she really wanted the entire world to see the injustice that was in America. There was another America that a lot of whites were not seeing. They were either turning a blind eye towards it or they were a part of the problem. And to be honest with you, both of them were being a part of the problem because Du Bois thought that it was a responsibility of whites and blacks to fix this injustice. And that's really going to be the call going forward. And a lot of people will jump on that. We also talked about what laws were called to undermine the 13th, 14th, and even 15th Amendment. Those were Jim Crow laws. And Jim Crow laws stripped Americans of color of their constitutional rights. And that's not a good thing for anybody to have your constitutional rights taken away from you. Problem with Plessy versus Ferguson, it said as long as it's separate but equal. But as we know, separate cannot be equal. And the importance of Jackie Robinson talked about how this man really stepped up, broke that color barrier, and then showed a lot of people that hey, you can come together, we can play this great sport, and blacks are just as good, if not better, at certain things. So let's look at education. Getting back towards that, we can see how this whole thing was pretty much divided. Legal segregation was required in all of the South. There was no getting around it. You could be one of these people that you wanted to serve everybody. The law said that you would be fined if you partook and did that. Then you have where segregation is prohibited. You see up here in these states and a few of them over here in the West. And then we've got no type of legislation on it. So I guess these people could do it if they wanted to, or they could not. Then we got the green states, and it is permitted there, but it's their choice if they want to do it or not. So now we arrive at the very famous court case of Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. It is labeled as Topeka, Kansas because there were several court cases that were asking, is segregation okay? Is it legal? Can you separate people and these people gain an equal equality in whatever they're doing? And this one is going to really focus on education. Now, so they lump all these court cases together and they're going to look at it and say, this is our best shot of, winning. And there was a little girl there in Topeka, Kansas, and she was having to go to school. Now, her school was, several miles away. She had to walk there every day, and just a few blocks down the road, there was an all-white school. And so her parents said, you know what? Why can't our kid just walk a few blocks and go to that school? And so people like Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP are really going to get on board with this, and they're going to bring in their legal team, and they're going to do a lot of research. And this research is actually going to go all the way to the top at the Supreme Court. This research included doing things like, okay, what's the conditions of the white school compared to the one at the African American school? And so, oh, well, the white kids are getting all the nice stuff like brand new books. They're getting more teachers for pure student capita, and the black kids overcrowding the schools, deteriorating structures, all types of things. They're getting a lot of the hand-me-downs, stuff that wouldn't be fit in a lot of areas. Then they take the research even further. They try to determine what type of effect is this having on a person of color's psyche. And so one of the tests they do is they take a group of young African American girls, place them in a room, and there are two boxes. One box has a bunch of white Barbie dolls, and the other box has a bunch of black Barbie dolls. And what they want to do is see what group of dolls will these kids play with. And the predominant thinking was, well, they're black, they'll probably play with the black dolls because that's what they're used to. But they didn't play with the black dolls. They went right up to the white dolls and played with them. And they played with them for a while, and then they were later on asked about why did you play with the white dolls when you played with black dolls your whole life? Their answer was very key and important. That answer was white kids always get all the nice things. We always see them playing with white Barbie dolls. So we wanted to have the nice thing for once. And this really showed the true problem of what this was doing to a child's psyche. They were growing up thinking that they were less. And that's never a good thing. We tell our kids, you can be anything you want to be when you grow up. Well, we're pretty much squashing that underneath this type of lifestyle. And Chief Justice Earl Warren realized that separate is far from equal. It is way off, and the country needs to turn around and provide that equal chance of opportunity, that equality. And so he says, end segregation in schools. We're going to integrate, we're going to bring the schools together. However, though, he has a problem in saying it. And the problem is that he offers the suggestion do this in all deliberate speed. Well, how long is all deliberate speed? Is it next week, next month, next year, 10 years, 100 years? And so a lot of people were taking that guidance on how to do this and say, well, we'll just do whatever we want to do. And so we're going to have something known as massive resistance. Massive resistance was started by Harry Byrd in the South, and it was pretty much the Southern guideline to trying to fight against integration. They refused to integrate, and they went and they did just about every dirty, cheap trick in the book that you could do. Like, for one, they would say, okay, we're going to close the schools down over the weekends. We're going to open up next week. We're calling it a private school. And as we all know, private schools, you have to apply to get in. You may get in, you may not. It's their choice. Luckily, though, the federal government was smart enough to realize that, hey, these people can close down and become private schools. They no longer receive any type of federal funds. So they pretty much had to go back to that and find other ways to try to resist this integration. Like I said, that problem of no firm guidance of saying all deliberate speed is a very big problem for the federal government, and the states will resist this for years. We can have examples of, the segregation lasting all the way up until the 70s and some places the 80s. So this court case happens in the 1950s. Takes that long to actually get fully enacted in all areas. And then we're going to talk about a group of students known as the Little Rock Nine. Now, the Little Rock Nine was a group of students that wanted to go to school in Arkansas, and they are going to have a hard time getting there. Every day they try to go to school, they march through a crowd, and this crowd is spitting on them, cussing at them, calling them all types of evil words that I'm not even going to mention. It's just a horrible tragedy that these young kids have to do this. And they have to do this every single day. And then they get to the doors, and the National Guard is standing there saying, you can't come in. This happens for 3 weeks. Now, Eisenhower, we talked about how he always used that silent hand. He didn't want his name to be known. He didn't want to make a direct order. Well, he finally stepped up and made a direct order here. He got rid of the silent hand and went straight towards bringing in federal troops to replace the National Guard, get them out of there to allow these students to go to school. Now, these kids are going to have a hard time at this school because, their peers have been told all types of bad things about these people. Racism is really kind of generational. Like when you see a racist person, they probably got it from their parent, and their parents probably got it from that parent of them. And so this is really going to start to break down some of that, deteriorate it, start to, these people are going to be around each other, and they're going to start to see, hey, these guys aren't so bad. We have a lot in common. These people are pretty cool. They like the same stuff we like. Our parents were completely wrong. And so this was an important step towards bringing down segregation, racism, and transforming it into a world that we are currently living in. And again, our world is not perfect. We have a long ways to go, but we've made a lot of headway in getting to where we are. I was watching ESPN the other day, and I saw where a NASCAR driver used the N word. He lost all the sponsors. Well, good. He should lose them all. There's no room in our world for words being thrown around like that. And so again, in education, we're going to have James Meredith. James Meredith, just like Thurgood Marshall and W.E.B. Du Bois, applies to go to school at the University of Alabama this time, and he gets denied. And he looks around and says, "Man, my test scores were better than some of those guys you let in. Well, why are you letting him in and not me?" And they tell him flat out, "Because you are a black person." So he's like, "This isn't right." So he takes to court. Court says, "You got to let him go. He meets all your qualifications." And so over 2,500 protesters are going to step up to try to stop him from going to the University of Alabama or Mississippi. I'm sorry. I don't know why I was thinking Alabama. Well, JFK steps in, sends in the National Guard along with federal troops, Secret Service agents, and they make sure that he is able to attend that school. All right, so let's go over a couple of questions for a review on what we just talked about. First one is, what did Brown versus the Board of Education say about segregation? And it said it's not equal. Separate is not equal. It's not good. Got to end it. It's really ruining the psyche of African Americans and other minorities. Next question, what's the importance of that case? Well, it got us a lot closer to where we are today. So I would argue if it weren't that case, it would have been another case at some point in time. I'm just glad it was done sooner rather than later. I would have preferred it to be a lot sooner. We might be even progressing even further today. Next question is, what's the major issue with that case? And that is, there was no firm guidance. That term, all deliberate speed. People looked at it and said, we'll get it done as fast as we can. It's just going to take us 100 years. And the South is really going to respond with that idea in their massive resistance. So how did many Southern schools respond to that? Of course, we just covered that. Massive resistance. They shut down schools, made them private, things like that. Played all these dirty little tricks. All right, what happened at Little Rock 9? Students were denied the right to go there. They eventually get in because the president orders the federal troops to make sure they go there. And then we start to see things change in America. This is just one small tidbit of it, but it will grow and start to spread. Kind of like this coronavirus, right? So, but in a good way. Now, the coronavirus is a terrible thing. All right, next question. Why was James Meredith denied the right to go to school? Again, because he was African American. So, that's going to conclude it for today's short, sweet lesson on education. Hope you guys are staying safe as always. I miss y'all. Be glad when we go back to normal, and I'm sure you are as well. Take care.